Looks like we've got a good attendance. We'll just give people another minute or two to come on and then we'll get started. Good morning to everybody who's joined. It's about 8 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. I see we've got good attendance. It's being recorded and will be available on the BGR website after the event. This will also be aired on WWNO New Orleans Public Radio in the near future. My name is Ben Dupuy. I'm a member of the BGR Board of Directors and chair of the Breakfast Briefing Committee. I'm pleased to welcome you to BGR's second virtual breakfast briefing of 2022. BGR is a private, nonprofit, independent research organization dedicated to inform public policymaking and the effective use of public resources for the improvement of government in the New Orleans metropolitan area. BGR's research, reports, and government monitoring are hallmarks of its public policy work in Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Tammany parishes. Our breakfast briefings further BGR's mission by bringing citizens, policymakers, and experts together to discuss issues affecting all of our lives. We encourage you to share these events on social media and with others who might be interested. Please mention @BGRNOLA and use the hashtag BGRBriefing. Today's event continues BGR's special breakfast briefing series on public safety. We'll hear from local and national experts on community-based strategies that can complement the efforts of law enforcement to make New Orleans safer. Here to tell us more about today's session and then moderate the Q&A portion of our event is Becky Mowbray, BGR's new president and CEO.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to first express our gratitude to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of BGR's Breakfast Briefing series again this year. Your support allows us to create these free events for citizens. We'd also like to thank WWNO New Orleans Public Radio for its promotional assistance. I am excited to welcome everyone to today's Bureau of Governmental Research event, the second in our special series on public safety. Our panel today will explore ways in which communities can take action to reduce violence and improve public safety. These community-based strategies are not designed to replace local law enforcement. Quite to the contrary, if these strategies succeed, they can help limit public safety problems where they start. In turn, they can help reduce the burden on police and on our criminal justice system. We hope to shed some light today on how New Orleans might achieve these beneficial effects. Then, on May 12th, we will hear the perspective of law enforcement leaders in New Orleans and Jefferson Parish. There are many knowledgeable speakers who could have joined us this morning to discuss community-based strategies. It is a topic that touches on many aspects of community life, such as youth development, economic stability for families, and the physical environment of neighborhoods. But we only have you until 9 a.m. We think today's panel, with their many years of experience both locally and nationally, can deepen our understanding of the issues at play. The views expressed in this program are those of the speakers involved. We now welcome Charles West to the Zoom screen to moderate our discussion. Charles is a member of BGR's Board of Directors and is president of the consulting firm Square Button Group. Several years ago, he served as director of the City of New Orleans Office of Criminal Justice Coordination. Charles was the architect of the NOLA for Life public safety strategy that focused on community-based solutions coupled with law enforcement that coincided with drops in the murder rate in New Orleans. Charles will introduce our three panelists today. Following their presentations, I will be back to take questions from the audience for the panelists. Webinar attendees can submit a question by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your screen. Just type your question in the box that appears and hit return. Charles, thank you tremendously for joining us today. The BGR breakfast briefing floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody who's out there. Very excited to talk about this topic. You know, over the years, you've probably heard people use complicated terms like a public health approach or risk and protective factors or socio-ecological model. I know I used all of those terms at one point in time when I was serving at the city of New Orleans, but we'll try to avoid jargon today. Simply put, we're here to learn about things other than police and potentially in concert with police that prevent and reduce violence. And so our first panelist is Dr. Jeffrey Butts, the director of the Research and Evaluation Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York. He will tell us about ways to build safety with community resources. Dr. Butts.
All right. Thank you, Charles. I very much agree with something Rebecca said, which is other strategies should never be described as alternatives or replacements for policing. When people say that, I think what that does is undermine the political support for these other strategies. And obviously we need other strategies than just policing. What I call this is building community safety with community resources, meaning there are things in a neighborhood we can do to improve safety. Sometimes people characterize public safety as being entirely a function of policing. If that were true, we would see it. When you go into a neighborhood and you can tell it's a safe neighborhood, you would see police everywhere if policing was the only way we produce safety. But obviously that's not true, that safety is a function of things in the community, the characteristics of the community, the resources in that community. But the challenge is, how do we turn that into a structure and a public policy framework that citizens can believe in, vote for, and support? What law enforcement has is a long tradition of identifiable interventions. People see patrol cars and uniforms and badges, and we know what they're doing, we know what they're for, and a lot of the public immediately trusts that that is to make them safe. You talk about other strategies and it's a little more amorphous, and that's harder for the public to hold on to. During the first few months of the pandemic, Arnold Ventures here in New York contacted John Jay College and asked us to put together a report. They also only gave us 90 days to do that. So our first strategy was to assemble the people on your screen to help create this report. Our challenge was to review empirical literature, meaning research studies that are of the kind of quality you need to rely upon with good statistical effects, just to find out things that would be associated with public safety. You'll see on the screen, we drew from people all over the country in universities, and each of them was asked to summarize, to review and summarize just one piece of the puzzle. And they were nice enough to include me as if I were qualified to be in this group. And over the course of 90 days, we put together all that work and produced a report. The report is on the John Jay College's Research and Evaluation Center's website. You can see there it's called Reducing Violence Without Police, a review of research evidence. They asked us to look for anything that could be associated with lower rates of crime and violence, but we had certain standards. We would not simply take a study that was what I would call pre-post. People often say, we opened up this program and shootings went down. Well, that doesn't prove that the program reduced the shootings. So you have to be a little more rigorous than that. We also only reviewed things that we thought were feasible and practical for a community, not pipe dreams and blue sky. And then all these things were put into this report. In the end, we identified 7 evidence-backed strategies that could be helpful in helping to keep a lid on violence. Evidence-backed is not the same thing as evidence-based. Evidence-based is a phrase researchers use to mean something very specific about the level of evidence for an intervention or a program or a policy. These are evidence-backed in that there are credible findings from studies showing that there's an association between something and rates of violence. So let me go through those. We found 7 strategies. The first one might seem sensible to some people. It's improve the physical environment. We know from good studies, both post hoc statistical controls and also actual interventions that are designed as a test, that if you just improve the way a neighborhood looks and feels, it will actually reduce violence. So a neighborhood with plenty of trees, with buildings that are well kept, with no abandoned buildings, with traffic which is well managed, and there's not a lot of congestion and horn honking and all that, can make the neighborhood feel safer, and in return, people actually behave better and violence goes down. The trick is to make these into programs that cities can understand and intervene with strategies, and to be intentional about, not just take advantage of random variation, but actually do this. There's literature, there are sources in our report you can click on. It's a credible strategy to make neighborhoods safer. Of course, it involves funding, and cities have to confront that too. But some things are very cheap. The next one is strengthen anti-violence social norms and peer relationships. This is what NOLA for Life did, basically. They took a model which is sometimes called the public health model. It acknowledges that violence spreads from person to person. People learn how to behave from observing other people behave. They find out what's accepted in their neighborhood. And programs like Cure Violence and Advance Peace have workers out in the community who are credible in that community, who form relationships with the people most at risk of being involved in violence, especially gun violence. And then you connect those people with resources. You talk to them about their lives, you make friends with them basically, and help turn them away from violence. That's not something you can just order up from some suburban social services agency. It has to be rooted in and grown from the community. When I started working on Cure Violence evaluations more than 5 years ago, and I can tell you the New Orleans effort was one of the most impressive I saw when we were touring the country talking to Cure Violence people. Not only was the program itself well conceived and being managed well, I noticed something I didn't see in a lot of cities, which was the law enforcement, city administration seemed to understand and value the program, and there was good coordination and trust, which is not always present in all cities. So congratulations to New Orleans. The next strategy is engage and support youth. And obviously anything you're doing in a city to try to reduce violence, you have to pay attention to young people. That's where most of the violence happens, unfortunately. By the time someone's 35, 40 years old, they're naturally starting to learn how to stay away from violent situations. But teenagers, 20-somethings, that should be the focus of an effort. And you don't have to always do therapy and what popular things like cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes just connecting young people to employment, to school, to reinforce in them the sense they have a future will reduce violence. And so that's a very important strategy. The next one also is obvious, substance abuse, but you don't always have to do professional drug therapy, drug treatment with people. Sometimes just having policies, closing alcohol distribution outlets that are accessible to teenagers, changing their hours, simple things that are described in the report can help reduce substance abuse and therefore reduce violence. And then a big one is financial stress. And this is something a lot of city officials are probably aware of, but they don't have any hope that they can ever change the situation, which is making the economic structure of our country less punishing for people, to mitigate crises so that they don't, so you reduce the instances of evictions and so forth. That's something we're seeing a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just helping people with their financial lives can help reduce violence. And then the last two are big, but you cannot ignore them. One is that we do have to have a justice system to intervene and to handle violence as it comes up. But if the community doesn't believe in it or perceives it to be a foreign body, you will not have the benefit of the justice process. You need to have a justice process which is transparent, fair, consistent. And that's a huge obstacle right now in this country, as we all know, but it's very important. And the last one is probably the number one task we have to confront, the gun problem. There's enough research showing, obviously, when there's a lot of guns flowing around the country, you're going to have shootings, gun violence. This country so far has refused to deal with it. Our elected officials just look the other way and pretend not to care. Someday we're going to have voters vote in people who take this seriously and try to do something about gun violence beyond just parroting Second Amendment rhetoric. And we're a long way from that. But if we don't do that, we'll just continue to have gun violence problems and continue to be talking about how to deal with it. Finally, all these strategies have to be evaluated. You can't just trust the fact that you have a great idea, let's go try to do it. You have to have partners that will do the measurements, track the implementation, track the outcomes, and produce evidence that your idea is actually helping to make a safer community. And that's tracking the outcomes. So you do need to track things like shootings, but changing the outcome is not sufficient. Just because shootings go down, as I said before, doesn't mean that the program or the policy reduce the shootings. You have to connect it. You need professional researchers as partners to help you demonstrate that. So what we call an effect size, statistical effect, which means, yes, shootings went down 20% in the program area. And importantly, they only went down 6% in a comparison area. If you have a well-matched comparison area, you can start to make the argument that your program actually reduced shootings. Finally, you need to go through this developmental pathway from an idea to the innovation to implement that idea, to do it multiple places or replicate it, to start to understand how it's done well, and to make it possible to do that well, what we call program fidelity, then evaluate it, and ultimately to do a rigorous randomized trial. Right now, community-based violence prevention is stuck probably in the first 3 stages of the idea, the innovation, and the replication. We do not yet have rigorous evidence that would convince a skeptic that these programs work. That report, as I mentioned, is on our website at johnjrec.nyc. That's my personal website, which connects to everything else. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'll now hand it back.
Thank you, Dr. Butts. So we're going to continue to use this frame of these 7 evidence-backed strategies for the rest of our conversation. We're going to hear a little bit more about some local efforts to employ those strategies. Reducing blight and increasing street lighting was mentioned, certainly as a thing that's been done here to improve the physical environment. As was just mentioned, a care violence team was launched in Central City in 2012. And although it operates a little differently now, it continues to strengthen anti-violence social norms and peer relationships. And significant criminal justice reforms have happened at both the state and local levels to reduce the number of people that are detained for low-level offenses, which helps to reduce the harmful effects of the justice system. Our 2 other panelists will delve more deeply into how 2 of the other strategies have been pursued in New Orleans. Karen Evans became the executive director of the Children and Youth Planning Board during the time that I was also a member of that body. She will talk about the importance of engaging and supporting youth.
Good morning, and thank you, Charles. I am going to share my screen now so that you can follow along with me in terms of the presentation that I get to bring you this morning. I welcome you to learn more about our local engagement with young people. As Dr. Butts mentioned, one of the key strategies to improve public safety is engaging and supporting youth. And thankfully, the New Orleans community has launched its first ever youth master plan. And today I'll share with you what that looks like and how we're moving that forward in a way to actively engage our young people to be part of the solution. So what is a youth master plan? Well, the way that we're liking it in New Orleans is through these 3 points. One is that it provides New Orleans with the opportunity to be very deliberate about the potential that it acknowledges and recognizes in our young people, and then to build the appropriate pathways to make sure that that potential gets realized. by our young people. It also represents a comprehensive roadmap for creating and sustaining this positive youth development focus. It allows us to stay on the side of our strengths and assets, look at the results-oriented approaches in New Orleans for our young people, and delve into ways to ensure that those results are meted out towards success. It is also a 10-year multi-sector plan for improving the outcomes of our children and youth across the parish. It's developed by and with young people, parents, educators, community leaders, and other stakeholders. And the 10-year marker for it gives us time to move change forward systemically across all lanes. And we're excited about that as a framework so that it doesn't rise and fall by way of a 2 to 3 year window. So when we talk about the young people of the city, who represent, by the way, 25% approximately of the population in New Orleans, we're looking at a group of young people who, sampled here on the screen, are giving their voices, their experiences and expectations and aspirations to this work. They're helping to inform and co-create and lead the planning and actions towards positive change that benefit them and those who follow them. We're again targeting young people from birth to 24. And what we're also ensuring is that we're centering the work on young people, by young people, about the experiences that our young people are having, and starting with where they are. So our Youth Master Plan plays out in 3 phases. Phase 1 represented these parts, and they included this collection of data and resource information, so we knew exactly what we were dealing with. What are the assets and resources that exist currently in our city as informed by Violink 211 and other resource guides? What is our youth well-being standard right now? How are the children right now? And Noya put together a youth well-being data dashboard to help identify the status of things for our young people today. And then in our NOLA Kids data book that the Office of Youth and Families in the Mayor's Office put together shows us by neighborhood what the current trends in child well-being are. We use both of those data tools and the 211 information to really help lay out the framing of the data and the resource information we needed to build out our plan. We moved into the visioning of the plan, and the youth really named where we're going. The youth laid out a rewrite of a narrative for the young people of the city. We gathered in about 100 or so young people across the city and asked them, what's the current narrative? How do people see and perceive young people in this city? And it was not favorable. It was more criminal in this description than it was hopeful. And the young people of the city didn't see that to be aspirational at all. It wasn't a place to lift up from, really. And so we asked them to create something other than, and they did. And so we've got a rewrite of that narrative that is their story, and it is that that drives and guides the plan. From there, we went forward and started convening these community conversations, which were involving young people as well as community leaders and community members and sector actors and from across various sectors to really talk about what does success look like for every developmental stage, birth to 24. How will we know we get there? What are the measures and markers that demonstrate that that success has been achieved? What are the barriers that prevent us from going in those directions? We gathered all that information, the youth narrative, the community conversation inputs, and the data, deposited that into working groups who then began to create solutions to the things that were presented in terms of issues. They began to identify data perspectives that would help us know better how to measure and monitor progress. And they helped to really make sure that we were linking up to advance the youth narrative as created by our young people. So what are the parts and pieces, you might be wondering, that are made up in the plan? Well, we've got 6 key areas, and we name them as categories. We see those categories really being the domains that touch every young person in the city. Our silo structure doesn't quite deliver the message around what young people interface with all the time. So we decided, instead of looking at a singular space, a singular area, that we would really take a look at the areas that cross-connect and really to build around young people. And were these areas attended to, we might be able to affect success. And so what we know for sure is that these 6 categories, which have been categories for us before, allow us to look at the youth as an individual and also the context, the environment where our young people are sitting. The categories are economic stability, space and place, youth voice, agency and identity, learning, health and well-being, safety and justice. That when these work together toward common solutions that are shared and connected, that we build a greater possibility for success to be achieved for our young people across the city. These points of information are connected originally from the 2016 Data Center Youth Index, and it gives us a longer view at the data that supports the presence of these ideas. In phase 2, we began to look at the action strategies and metrics. And so in terms of the action strategy development, we really were looking to make sure that we were, as a steering body, prioritizing solutions into the first 2 years of action and implementation, to develop work plans that allowed us to see the steps necessary to successfully achieve that strategy, and then to make sure that our data, excuse me, that our data was clear, that we agreed upon the goals and the indicators that we're going to be measuring that demonstrate movement towards results, and that we set the baseline in terms of our now and what we want to see in terms of progress in 2 years and then in 10 years, and connect then the variety of data systems that inform that metric. In terms of sustainable funding, we also wanted to make sure we had the resources lined up and recalibrated to ensure that we were funding the approaches that we were naming. And we were doing that through our fiscal map work, as well as through coordination around resources. And then we move into implementation, which is exactly where we are now, where we're looking at how those action strategies are delivered, who receives them, what kind of progress and touch points can we demonstrate as a result of those things, and as determined by whom. So we use youth participatory action research as a lens through which the youth determine the extent to which we're reaching these targets and how so, and what's still left undone. We have community conversations as a stake in our ground that allows us to reconnect to youth and the community members to share updates and to get information back in about how things are continuing to present. And then finally, we hold progress reports and continuous quality improvement strategies that make sure we're mining the work and making sure that we're paying attention to opportunities to course correct. And finally, I'll leave you with this idea. And that is really, it speaks to what Dr. Butts mentioned in terms of engagement and support and connection, that safety really is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of connection. We see the Youth Master Plan as a strategy that will help us build those kinds of connections across our young people and across our community over time, and ultimately sow seed in terms of safety and public regard for all. So I'll stop there and encourage you to go to NOLA-youthmasterplan.org to see the entirety of the Youth Master Plan. Charles, I'll return to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. So our next presenter, James Logan, is the immediate past president of the 100 Black Men of Metro New Orleans, where he engages and supports youth through mentoring. He's also the former Reentry Services Program Manager for the City of New Orleans, where he and I work together. He will tell us about efforts to mitigate financial stress, especially for people that have been incarcerated.
Thank you, Charles. So as Charles said, I served for 6 years as the Reentry Services Program Manager for the city. And I also currently serve as an action table co-chair for the Greater New Orleans Funders Network. So my experience as working in philanthropy now, as well as my experience working for the city in reentry, is kind of how I frame what I'm going to talk about today. So Dr. Butts outlined in his presentation and his report that mitigating financial stress and negative income shocks may reduce violence. And he stated that financial stability and economic opportunities help to reduce crime. So from my perspective, a clear way to kind of view this work is through the reentry lens. In reentry, every reentry experience is different, but the first 72 hours of someone's return can make all the difference. And there are a couple of things that have been tried and true tools for success in reentry within those 72 hours and afterwards that also apply to the overall and general conversation. One of the things that we find is that people that are coming home automatically have some needs. And one of the big ones and one of the big tools that you can provide is rapid attachment to work. Opportunity and income reduce stressors. So a person that's engaged in the criminal legal system at any stage is not there by themselves. Their whole family is adversely affected. So when someone's coming home, being able to provide them with an income and then ultimately a good paying job with steady income benefits their entire family. When they come home, they're expected to be instant breadwinners for their children and their family, which automatically provides instant tension. So being able to provide them with opportunities and hope goes a long way. So there's some organizations that do this on the ground. One is the Center for Employment Opportunity CEO, which engages people coming home directly with employment. But it doesn't necessarily just have to be in the reentry lens. Also, you have organizations that do job training for those who either have been involved in the criminal legal system or are quote unquote at risk that can be incredibly beneficial, because when you provide someone with an opportunity and a path forward, it reduces their likelihood of committing crime. Secondly, wraparound services. So we really have to acknowledge our needs in New Orleans in affordable housing, health, and mental health, and really address those holistically for us to be able to move forward. The Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies reported that in New Orleans, 60% of children suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and that are 4.5 times more likely than their peers nationwide to show signs of immediate and serious emotional disturbance. And so we really need to look at the services and the resources that we provide in these areas and make sure that they're, one, well-resourced and funded, and then secondly, available with access to those who need them. Third, and Dr. Bucks talked about this, the importance of peer group and group counseling for those who are engaged. Peer groups go a long way. When you're trying to improve your life or make positive steps and choices, it is a really beneficial thing to be able to engage those people who are going through the same struggle that you are or have made it through the struggle to, one, help you through and give you positive coping tools and mechanisms to be able to move forward. And then lastly, on this piece, the importance of mentoring and credible messengers. Dr. Butts talked about this as well. Working with and providing resources to people with lived experiences make for better solutions. They say the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. That is very true. And also, if we're going to work in this space and really look at having robust and holistic solutions for those who are involved in the criminal legal system in any way, those people need to be at the table and setting the stage. As they say, nothing about us without us. And so with that, there are a few other things that I think are important for us to be able to address. Restorative justice. So we have a great organization here called the Center for Restorative Approaches that does restorative justice work in schools and is now expanding out to build out programming with our criminal legal system actors. That's incredibly important for low-level crimes. And the reason I'm bringing it up today is because people don't instantly go into violent crimes in most cases. They kind of graduate. And so this is an effective way to reduce recidivism and also create community. When people are tied to their communities, they're less likely to engage in crimes against community. And it also gives them an opportunity to really find other strategies instead of deeper engagement in criminal behavior. At the previous breakfast briefing, Lamar Gardier outlined that poverty coupled with inequity is considered a primary driver of violent crime. we have an opportunity now to really address one of not just the symptoms, but the actual driver of violent crime, which I agree with Lamar is definitely inequity and poverty. We have an economic crisis on our hands in New Orleans. Half of Black households earned 63% less than white households in 2016, according to census data. And half of the Black families earn less than $25,324 a year. This was in 2016. MIT said that the living wage in 2016 in New Orleans for one adult with one child is $22 an hour, which comes out to $47,611 annually. With that, there's a definite need for us to really look at how do we build sustainable wages and opportunities for people to be able to, one, grow their families and then ultimately thrive. So we have an opportunity to address this through proven mechanisms like the expanded child tax credit, which we've seen has had some positive impact, as well as I said earlier, increasing the minimum wage. Low minimum wage has been shown to depress wages and cause greater income inequality. And so there's been a good amount of work being done by philanthropy and nonprofits to really, one, improve the outcomes for people within New Orleans by creating entry-level pathways. The focus has been on emerging industries in New Orleans. So what we've tried to do is focus on training programs in areas that we see as growth opportunities in New Orleans. So stormwater management and green infrastructure, healthcare. We have a robust partnership related to community health workers. There's also opportunities and training in the IT sector around coding and also around sales. But really the goal is to provide investment in entry-level training programs, but also with wraparound supports, because it's necessary to not just provide people with an opportunity for a job, but also deal with all the other holistic issues that they may have to ultimately get them to a stable economic and physical environment. So related to young people, in Dr. Butts in his report stated that young people finishing school during periods of high entry-level job availability was significantly less likely to engage in repeated violent criminal activity than youth leaving school and entering the labor market during downturns in entry-level employment. Entry-level employment is key. If people can see a pathway forward that's outside of criminal activity, and there's a way for them to access it and be successful at it, they will take it. And so we have a responsibility to really increase the amount of opportunities and training programs and access that people need. So providing a living wage is a long-term investment in the people of New Orleans. And that's really what's needed to curb the cycle of violent crime and create opportunities for all of our people to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And now I'll hand off to Becky to handle our Q&A.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you to all of our presenters. This has been a terrific program. If Karen and Jeff could also come back to the screen, we will transition to our question and answer period. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts and insights to us. It's now time to shift to the audience Q&A portion of our program. To the members of our audience, if you would like to ask a question, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, type the question into the box and hit return. We've already got a number of great questions. I will start with a couple that are for all of the panelists. The first is, all of us who love our city want to take action, and we ask, what can we do to be part of the solution? What can we do now to make our city safer? Anyone?
Well, I'll jump in then. So I'm not from New Orleans, so I shouldn't be the first person to speak, but I could say I noticed that public officials do notice when the community is engaged in an uprising. So protests, marches, people making noise. It doesn't necessarily translate into something specific, but it definitely gets the attention of the power structure. As long as it's peaceful and focused, people notice. So I think that, and then the next thing is to have an organized group of people that then provide some direction to those elected officials when they're in a panic about the protests. And often that second step is missing, or we allow elected officials to take the protests and use it for their own means. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I agree with what you're saying, Dr. Butts. I'm going to offer a more personal response to that pre-protest possibility. And that is, make sure you know the people you live around. Know your neighbors well enough to have a conversation with them offline, in person, walking down the street. Nextdoor is an interesting platform, but it does disconnect us from each other. And connection is a powerful tool toward creating greater safe spaces. And that connection needs to extend not just to the neighbors that you see, but to neighbors that you connect with outside of your immediate domain. We need to figure out how to have social grace again. And that comes from really connecting and putting ourselves in spaces where we're talking to one another and looking to understand what we hear from one another. So on a personal level, I think we can all engage in some social connections with those who live around us to build relationships so that we can together increase the safety of our immediate spaces. And then to do the same, extend the same courtesy, particularly to young people who we might be a little less willing to connect with, whether they're young people who are traveling down your roads or that you come across with just a greeting could open up a gateway for possibility. And we tend to be a little bit reserved sometimes with engaging in those who are returning to our communities from spaces that James spoke to, or from young people who are looking for a way to be present and engaged in community, in addition to doing that with one another who we live around. So there's power in protest, and you've got an opportunity to get in front of protests by connecting with those people that you were closest to in terms of proximity, and those that you get close to just based on the way you move around the city. So I would encourage us first to get to know one another so that we might find those common points of concern, and then use that lever to begin to organize ways that we manifest our voice for change.
Totally agree on all the points. I'm going to add one thing. We all have what we call time, talent, and treasure. And so there's nonprofits, there's groups around the city that are working to address a lot of these issues that can really use your help. And so if you have some time, you have some talent, you have some treasure, you can definitely spread those around and kind of help be part of the solution.
Thank you. Our second question is also for everyone. Violence prevention programs and strategies often seem to change from administration to administration. How can a community make sure that initiatives are given the time that they need to show and sustain results?
I was going to let Charles hit this one first, but I'll take it. I know he'll chime in. I think the important thing is to really depoliticize these programs and really make them partnerships within community and the administrations. Part of it is when you have a new administration, everyone feels like I need to change everything and make things my own. But I think it's more important to really look at the long-term sustainability of these things. And so building out structures and infrastructure so they can last beyond administrations, and that no matter who's the mayor or the city council members or the sheriff, that these programs can continue on, and then they can have consistent evaluation throughout the entire process. So you keep what works and you retool or rework what doesn't.
I'll add just very quickly. All right. I was the director of the Office of Criminal Justice Coordination. Under one mayor, I was appointed to serve multiple times as a member of the Criminal Justice Council that office staffs by another mayor. And I was able to see a number of things persist through administrations. And it largely did have to do with those things that were supported more broadly. And so I agree with James. It is very much about ensuring that, in particular, if you look at the reentry work that James led, I got an email just last week about coming to a meeting of a group that he originally stood up, got to be 9 years ago. And he hasn't been involved in it for 3 to 4 years, probably easily. But it's because there was a coalition of people, very much like Karen described. There was a coalition of people who all saw the value of it, who contributed to the creation of it. And so they were able to continue it and demonstrate to any elected official that might come in that it was a valuable contribution to our community.
Anybody else?
I was just going to say similarly that community engagement is powerful. And when we ensure that the work that we're doing engages community at the front end and throughout, that voice, those energies and those efforts get life beyond administration because they belong to the community. And as long as they belong to the community, they will last long in the community as long as the community holds it as a value. So for the folks who are eager to get involved, involvement matters because it is in fact the grout that holds things together.
And I'll just say, other side of the same coin, I guess. Also be prepared early on to start gathering information and have it at the ready when the administration changes to say, fine, you want to cancel this, but here are the numbers showing you that it's actually working. So it's up to you, but here's the data. It has to be credible.
Super. That is a great transition, Jeff, to several questions that we've been getting for you about your specialty of program evaluation. One is, Jeff, rigorous program evaluation is expensive and requires people with very particular skill sets. How can local governments and nonprofit organizations on tight budgets ensure that this important component isn't forgotten or conducted carelessly? And let me go to another one. Let's see, how can the impact of community-based strategies for safety be measured? Should organizations plan for measurement as they develop their programs?
Yes, when I saw these questions, I thought, are these friends of mine asking these questions? Because they're perfect. Yes, well, two things. Evaluation is less expensive if you build in regular creation and harvesting of administrative data. So if you're not dependent on collecting all new data every time, you can actually be producing a regular series of reports. The trick is to have administrative data that's something other than just law enforcement. If these programs are entirely dependent on tracking arrests and shootings and reported crimes, that's helpful and it should be a part of it, but it's not the full picture and misses a huge part of public safety if you're just looking at police data. But if you have things like jobs, evictions, school enrollments, dropouts, and you're tracking those on a regular basis, you can start to form some statistical relationships between your efforts and those outcomes. It takes time, but if you can educate your policymakers to be aware of all those different outcomes and not just focus on how many people were hurt by crime, you can actually start to demonstrate effectiveness. Then, yes, it should be part of your design early on. You should be thinking about it. So it doesn't have to be expensive, but you also need partners who are willing to work with you. One of my biggest complaints about my own community is academics too often only care about themselves. They want to get the best journals. They want to get promoted. They write things very wonderfully and send them off to journals that the community never sees. And that to me is not public service. It should be a value of local universities to have information that's circulated in the community, that's accessible to people, and that has an impact on public policy and decision making. But we have to reform academics in order to accomplish that. And that's another hurdle.
Terrific. Karen, next question is for you. Today's high schoolers were born in the chaotic years immediately after Hurricane Katrina, which was 17 years ago. And today's young adults were young children immediately after the storm. Do you think Hurricane Katrina is a factor in the crime wave that New Orleans is currently experiencing? And what theories or evidence might point to this explanation?
So I will start by saying, I don't know. But I will say that I believe poverty is an antecedent to the current crime wave. I believe inequity is an antecedent to the current crime wave. I would say this, that it's not the high schooler, because I want to point out that while we get a lot of repeat reports on crime as it infers juvenile involvement, just the term itself suggests criminality already. So when young people are poised to be described as folk involved in crime, we're really talking about, in this city, approximately not even quite 1% of our city's youth population. And so the other 99% are doing quite well and quite fine. But we don't talk about that in this city. We replay the tape for the just under 1% so that we have this relevance to this false narrative about criminality and youth going together. So I can't hold that as a truth, but what I can tell in terms, the data is right, but the story is wrong. The story about the presence of our young people being high school graduates or just immediate graduates from the era of Katrina, while that might be true, their parents had to move them around, disconnect from their base called neighborhood safety, disconnect from their solid connections that offered support and extension to family, disconnect from those things that gave them a sense of belonging, and reroute themselves into other disparate places to try to figure out how to survive. In that survival, they lost revenue, income, housing, family connection, community connection, and a host of other things that they had to recreate, and sometimes not possibly recreated because of the damage and the loss. So I think that Katrina played a role in our current composition of how even today, space and place, environmentally, we haven't cleaned that up yet. How many years later? We still have residue on our landscape that says we are hurricane impacted. Katrina. I believe that Katrina had an absolute impact to this community. Totally. I also believe that there is healing opportunity that was missed. And I believe that it pulled apart things that were strong initially. I want to point out that that's not about youth crime. That's about social disregard. That's about really allowing the depreciation of community. And that sows seed into sort of the recurrence of violence. It's not just about youth violence. And I'll stop there before I get on a different soapbox.
Okay, thank you. James, New Orleans high school graduation rate has increased tremendously since Hurricane Katrina. Why do we need so many job training programs? Could public schools be doing more to prepare youth for successful careers?
So I am a big fan of vocational programs within schools. It's something that for some reason we've all gotten away from. I think, I understand the push, put everybody in college. I get that, but that's not really the reality of the situation. I think ultimately you need to provide lots of options for young people, pretty much throughout the gamut, and then allow young people to choose where they want to go. The training programs I think are important because it gives those young people a leg up when they do enter the workforce, if they choose to enter the workforce, with skills that they can go and work immediately after they finish the program. And I think that's an incredibly important part. There's also something I did talk about, but I want to make sure that I make that clear as well. Training programs are the first piece of it. The second piece of it are for those actual employers to actually employ, because you need them both to work together, otherwise it doesn't work.
Fantastic. Jeff, our next question for you picks up with where you had left off in your previous answer. What role can local universities play in fighting crime in New Orleans? Should local universities be working to build world-class criminology programs with the capacity to evaluate the evidence behind various public safety strategies going on in the laboratory of our city right around us?
Yeah, as I alluded to last time, it's tricky that even in my own university where I work, the most energetic, focused researchers are often early career researchers. And unfortunately, the university continually reinforces in them that the only way to advance is to publish in all those journals that only academics read. And I don't know how to get around that. By the time you're as old as I am with the white beard and everything, you can be more generous and focus on publications that are accessible to community. But I'm not the kind of person that should be out in the community as much. So what I do is hire young people to work with me to do the research, to do the data collection, and they're out in the community. That's my solution to try to deal with this issue. But what you need in a local university is someone who is a post-tenure, someone who's already got job security, who cares about your mission, who wants to help develop information to evaluate your mission. And they're not just looking for your data set that they can go home and analyze and send off to a journal. And you have to get to know them. You also can't rely upon out-of-towners to come in and do evaluation because they blow half the budget on plane fare and hotels. You want someone that lives right there, that's from your local community, probably not your most prestigious university, but someone who is who grew up there and cares about the neighborhood and cares about your program. But they also have to be smart enough to know they need to develop good data and good analytics that can prove the case. You can't rely upon just rhetoric and political statements. What you need to do is anticipate the most egregious next mayor who's going to try to undermine your program. And you need to have data for that person who will come after you to try to back them up by saying, here's our evidence. And that's just, you have to have a long-term solution.
Karen, what type of youth programs and services do we need more of? And what are the obstacles to expanding these types of programs?
That is a good question. I think that I'll start with the obstacles first. The obstacles speak to really investment. And so the reality is that youth programs are not inexpensive to deliver so that we route the kinds of changes that the city says they want and that the young people have described that they want. And so for our purposes, we need youth programs that are developed with young people centered in them and that are positioned across developmental stages. So they are not just for the 20 to 24-year-old or the 0 to 5, but they are all the developmental stages so that there aren't these gaps and these points around which we lose young people through cracks that we've created just through negligence. So we need a balanced offer across the entirety of the developmental stages, and we need to commit to investment beyond K-12. Because while K-12 is being asked to do everything, what we know for sure is they can't do everything. And we need to look at what we can build around that because the needs for youth development happen outside of the K-12 calendar and outside of the K-12 schedule. So we have to make sure we're willing to and committing to invest in the entirety of the spectrum, across developmental stages, outside of the K-12 calendar, and that centers on youth targeted per age stage. Stop there.
Thank you. James, what are the key components of an effective job training program?
I think first, one, doing an assessment of what the market is, making sure you're training people for jobs that actually exist. Having a partnership with employers that can hire people directly after they finish the training program. But then as far as the training program itself, being experiential, being hands-on, it can't be a situation where you're sitting in the classroom and learning how to do a job, by a textbook. You need to really be on the ground and learn how to do it. And then secondly, really those wraparound services. One of the reasons why people don't finish training programs is because life gets in the way. And, at the last 2 years with COVID, everybody knows life gets in the way. So how do we help people through those needs while they're in this training program and then follow them to make sure they retain the jobs they have and provide guidance for them as they move towards their career?
Fantastic. We're going to do one more question. Jeff, can you discuss the evidence on early childhood education's impact on crime? These programs take decades to show results. So what outcomes should communities monitor in the shorter term to make sure their programs are on track to produce the desired results?
So that's not my specialty, but I would recommend an evaluation design called Staggered Start, where you have a sequence of innovations that you test over time and you do overlapping cohorts. So you see if doing this with 7-year-olds make things better when they're 8-year-olds, doing this with 8-year-olds, does it make things better when they're 9-year-olds? And you can do all those things at the same time. The idea that you have to intervene with 7-year-olds and then wait till they're 18, yeah, that's never going to influence policy. So look at small goals with overlapping age cohorts to document the impact of good early childhood education. But again, it's not my specialty.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you all for speaking with us today. And thank you, Charles, for guiding our discussion of this important topic. Thanks again to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of this breakfast briefing. And thanks to all of you in the audience for being with us. A recording of today's breakfast briefing will be available on our website, bgr.org, along with the slides involved in today's presentations. Our today's program will also be rebroadcast on WWNO New Orleans Public Radio on Thursday, April 28th at 9 p.m. And please join us on May 12th for our next event, where we will hear from NOPD Superintendent Sean Ferguson and Jefferson Parish Sheriff Joseph Lopinto. Former U.S. Attorney Jim Letton will moderate that discussion. You can either attend in person or watch online, and registration is free at bgr.org. The best way to stay on top of all BGR events and research is to become a member. We regularly engage with our members about our public policy work, and we value this dialogue. We also rely on our members to help amplify BGR's policy recommendations. If you're not currently a member, please visit bgr.org to join the ranks of concerned citizens working to improve local government. We thank you for participating in this event and for staying engaged in public policy discussions important to our community. Have a terrific day, and we hope to see you again at the next event in this special series and at future breakfast briefings.